Psychology is all around us. Psychological elements can be seen throughout the lifespan, from birth until death. Films are a wonderful tool to explain psychological theory and occurrences in our lives. Characters interact within each frame of film psychological concepts. The films we remember most and view multiple times engage us by capturing the presence of these psychological dynamics in an authentic way. Please join me today, Dr. Katherine Marshall Woods, media psychologist, and my guest today, John Stevenson, with his film Middle Watch on the best psychology in film. Hello, everyone. Today we have the wonderful opportunity to speak with John Stevenson. He actually was the filmmaker of Middle Watch. Thank you for coming, John.
Very happy to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Middle Watch?
Well, Middle Watch came out of a failure. I had directed an animated feature called Sherlock Gnomes. I'd moved from Los Angeles back to London and to make Sherlock Gnomes, which took 3 years, and it was a huge flop. I had this interesting experience. My first feature film was Kung Fu Panda, and that was a big hit. It got critically well received. It made a lot of money. And then Sherlock Gnomes was the exact opposite. It was a huge flop. It lost money, and everybody hated it. It got terrible reviews, and it was the exact inverse experience of Kung Fu Panda, which is probably quite a useful, healthy thing to have. But at the time, it was not happy, and I was sort of quite depressed, and I was sort of kicking around the house in a grumpy, kind of depressed kind of a way after all the bad reviews and the the sort of financial sort of news of how the film was going to do, which was obviously badly. So, and I knew and basically that meant that I was going to be sent to direct to jail. I wasn't going to be employed for a while, and that was just going to make life tough. So I was pretty down. And after, I think my wife gave me like 3 months of being a kind of grumbly bear at home, and then had enough, and basically said to me, look, why don't you just make a short movie or something? And I think my response at the time was like, yeah, easy for you to say, yeah, some stupid thing like that. And then, as sometimes happens, literally, I think it was the next day, while I was just poking around on the internet, I found what would become the basis of Middle Watch, which was this. I like cryptozoology. As a kid, I loved reading books about the Abominable Snowman and Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, and I loved the idea that there were these things in the world, and that we just these mysteries and these sort of things. And then today, I like cryptozoology for a completely different reason, which is because we got GPS. The world's been thoroughly explored. It's very interesting to me how people still believe in Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster or any of this stuff. It's like, you know, Google Maps can show you every inch of the globe. How can there be a big monster wandering about anywhere that no one's, and yet people still believe it? And that belief is interesting to me. So I was on some cryptozoology sites, and I found this story about a particular incident that was recorded in a letter during the Second World War about a sailor who said he had an encounter with if it was true, the biggest giant squid ever seen by human beings. He said he was on a warship in the Indian Ocean on the Middle Watch, which is the graveyard shift between midnight and 4 a.m. And it was just him and this gigantic squid that was longer than his ship. And I found out what kind of ship it was. So it would have meant that the squid was over 200 feet long, came up and was alongside his ship. Didn't do anything. It didn't do anything exciting like attack. It was just there. And then it went away. And I just thought this was great, but he couldn't prove it, and he said he never told anybody for he wrote a letter to a magazine called Animals. I don't know if you can see, but that there is the actual letter that I've eventually managed to get a hard copy of the actual thing. There was just extracts when I found it online. Um, but I went down this rabbit hole after of I wanted to find out about this idea, and then from that became the seed of trying to make this into a film, because the thing itself was sort of an event. That's not a film. That's just this sort of strange thing happened and then it stopped happening. That isn't a story. That's not a reason to make a film. A film for me normally arises out of a question. What if, what something like that, a way of framing an experience with a question to make you consider it. And the question that I asked myself when I read that would be, what does an experience like that do to you? And it doesn't matter whether in his case it was a giant squid, but it might as well have been a vision of the Virgin Mary or a unicorn or a space alien or who knows what, something extraordinary. You're the only person who sees it, and then you keep it to yourself because whatever you're worried that the penalties of revealing this experience would be, presumably negative to you. So why did you have that experience? What is, was that a good thing in your life, or was that the worst thing in your life? I was just kind of trying to imagine this guy's life from the point of view as a young man when if he did actually see this. There's no, maybe he just made it up. I don't know. But the question was still interesting to me, whether it was true or false, was if this had happened and you had this experience and then you kept it to yourself for the next 30 years, but presumably not a day would go by when you wouldn't think about that crazy thing that happened to me, but you never filter it out in any way. It's kept inside. What does that do to you? So that really became the what does it do to you became the seed that the film grew out of.
Cannot wait until individuals are able to get an opportunity to see this film. Let's give the audience a moment to be able to see the trailer, and we'll be right back.
No, 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 no!
one of the things that I thought was really well done of this film was the aspect of PTSD symptoms that was are well shown within this film. Specifically, the character has flashbacks. They have physiological symptoms like of hand shaking. They have nightmares. And I'm wondering what made you add, or what made the team add this element to this character in particular. Why PTSD, for an example?
Well, I mean, the idea for adding the PTSD came from my co-director, Aisha Penwarden, and she and her partner Rob Strachan, they became kind of like my they were sort of like my captains, lieutenants on this film, but they did like the bulk of the heavy lifting, because of the circumstances of making this film during the pandemic when we were all separated. They had come from the University of Falmouth. They were grad students from there, and I promoted Aisha to be my co-director and Rob to be my animation director because they had direct experience of working with all the students in Falmouth. So once we had, as I said, we'd started the production in person, and then the pandemic hit. We all had to go into our little bubbles, but so I relied on them very much to deal with the students because they knew them, and I really didn't. And I was in London, and they were in Cornwall, which is the opposite end of the country. And Aisha came up with the idea of introducing PTSD as a way to adding, some psychological depth to the film. We didn't have that at the beginning. We just had this guy encountering a weird thing, and the question of what does the experience do, and it wasn't quite enough. It wasn't, it was sort of okay, but so what to a certain extent. And she introduced the idea that maybe this guy is bringing in something from his past that he has to deal with, and then this experience that he has is it either helps or it hinders that processing. As I said, because we were all going through lockdown, we decided that it was, if it was going to do anything, it was going to be a positive outcome. It was going to help him, not hurt him, because he'd already been, if we were going to take PTSD, then he'd already been traumatized enough. So we wanted it to be a strange gift, if you like, rather than a punishment. But that idea came from Aisha, and then we sort of reached out and did as much investigating as we were able to do long distance about the symptoms of PTSD, what it sort of can do to affect somebody in going into their life. And we tried, within limitations of making a short film of about 11 minutes, that has very little dialogue. We tried to be as responsible as we could in terms of showing the effects of PTSD accurately as much as we can within an animated film, and sympathetically, certainly, and as truthfully as we were able. From talk, we talked to sort of people who'd had naval experience and things like that. So whatever we could do, even though it was not an ideal situation to be doing it, on Zooms or via emails or anything like that, we did. But creatively for us as the filmmakers, I think that was the key that unlocked the film to being to working as a short film. I think without that element, the film, if we'd have made it without it, it might have been interesting. It might have had an interesting visual animation style, but perhaps it wouldn't have had much psychological depth. I think the fact that guy is traumatized. We see the trauma at the beginning of the film, and we see that he's carrying stuff with him. One of the things we try to indicate in his relationship with this picture of he carries with him of his family is that's who he was before the film. This was a happy family guy who had a wife and a child, still does, but he went through a horrible experience, and now he knows that version of himself doesn't exist anymore, and he can't bear to look at it because it's too painful, because he can't be that person anymore. And hopefully, where we get him at the end is the idea that maybe he can be that person again. That was sort of the journey. And I think without those elements, then the film is you know wouldn't be, hopefully. I believe, the film is weirdly, most things I do commercially, like even Kung Fu Panda, which I'm pleased with. When I finish them, I never want to see them again. I spend 3 or 4 years making something. I watch it a couple of times just to make sure it's technically correct, and then I never watch it. And I'll spend the rest of my life never watching Kung Fu Panda or Sherlock Gnomes or any of the things I did again, because all I can see are the compromises and the things where I wish it had been better, or we'd had more time, or we could have done a better job, or whatever. Middle Watch is the only thing I've ever made in the last 50 years where I'm quite happy to watch it. Again, every now and again I go, I want to see, I want to see my film, and it's not because of my ownership of it. It's because Aisha and Rob and all the students put so much of themselves into the film, and because I think we were able to find hopefully something truthful and meaningful that at least worked for us as we were making it. That I can see it, and it's not it may have been compromised because we didn't have any money, and so it was all done volunteer, and it took a long time, like as I said, like over 3 years to make 11 minutes. But it's not compromised creatively. All the things I ever do commercially, there are compromises you have to make with the studio, or things that are required of you that you kind of would prefer not to do, but you kind of have to because you're being paid and they want it to be put in. So you do it the best you can, but you might go, I wouldn't have done that. But this one, it was me. It was like, I was where the buck stopped. It didn't go in the movie unless I was happy with it. And so for that reason, I can look at Middle Watch because of these things we added, and I don't mind looking at it. I go, no, that achieved what I hoped it would achieve. And honestly, it's the only thing in 50 years I've done that I can say that about.
That is such a wonderful accomplishment. And the fact that you can take that as your work. This is what you
Well,
create.
it's not my accomplishment. I would say that is everybody's accomplishment. I can enjoy the film not because, oh, how clever I am, but because of this sort of communal work that we all did over a long period of time, where a lot of people put ideas in, my job was just to be the filter to go, that's a good idea, that will help the film, that's a good idea, but it's not doesn't fit with the film. That was really my job. I was sort of the quality control and the filter, but everybody got to put themselves into the film, and a lot of the best ideas were not mine. They came from other people like Aisha and Rob, and I had a sort of mantra when I was making Kung Fu Panda, which applied to, actually applies to everything I've done, certainly applied to Middle Watch, which is I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I just have to be smart enough to know who the smartest person in the room is and take their ideas. And that was kind of my job on Middle Watch. I was just being smart enough to go, oh, that's a good idea, we'll do that. Oh, that's a good idea, we'll do that. And by the way, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's the most cost effective and time effective way of motivating a crew. Just say thank you. Takes 3 seconds, costs no money. Give credit where credit is due. You will motivate your crew, and nobody ever does it. It never happens in my experience. Someone comes up with a great idea, and somebody will go, "Yeah, great, we'll do that," and nobody ever goes, "And thank you for giving us that idea, which will help the film." Nobody gets acknowledged in meetings when they come. It's just sort of subsumed into the, and it takes no time just to stop for a moment and go, that's a great idea, by name, whoever you are, in front of people. Thank you. We appreciate it. your work is going to help improve the film. Just by stopping for 3 seconds and doing that, that probably, raises that person's morale and emotional investment in the project, 100%, and what did it cost you? Absolutely nothing. And it never happens. And I don't know why.
Well, one thing that you mentioned was the word sympathetically added. And that is actually one of the words that I had written down as I was watching Middle Watch was compassionate. The way that you all show PTSD symptoms was such a compassionate way of showing it. I mean, granted, of course, you're showing the details of it where, again, he's having flashbacks, he has nightmares, and, his hands are shaking and things of sort. But the photograph that you mentioned is quite important for this film, not just also because, like you said, this is who he was in the past and he can't bear seeing who he once was and not being able to look at it, but the fact that it's lost in the ocean and that this is where he also lost himself. The trauma happened when he's in the ocean, and then the photograph goes into the ocean. He loses himself into it, and then we don't know where he's going to come out until he does experience this giant squid. And luckily, it provides a healing property to him. It does provide a hope.
There was a sort of circularity, like, he is lost on the ocean and he loses something, very important to himself in the ocean. And then the ocean gives him something unexpected back, which he wasn't hoping for or expecting, and was probably quite shocking. But ultimately, that experience of something coming up from the ocean, his photograph goes down and it is lost in the depths, and something from the depths of his subconscious, or in reality, because I think hopefully the other thing that we tried to do was, did this really happen, or was this just in his mind? You could look at it as a sort of little fugue that happened to him while he was alone on deck, and it might not, that experience might just be in his head. It doesn't matter if the experience is still powerful enough that he is transformed by it, then it's a meaningful experience. But he might not have actually seen a giant squid. He might just have imagined he saw a giant squid, or it might really have happened. I don't know. We leave that for people. Whether it was purely in his mind, certainly some of it is in his mind. We make that clear. But whether it's all in his mind, we don't make clear. But whatever happens, hopefully we make the statement that he is changed by it, and there is a path to him. We try to sort of say that he's been so turned inward by this trauma that really he can only look down. He doesn't look much beyond the world in front of his feet. He does his duties. He's in this very small world of this ship on a limitless ocean, and at the end of the film he looks up. That was the point. He looks up and he sees an infinite world above him, and maybe he can find an infinite world within him to explore and be changed, and maybe he can go back to port and see his wife and kid again and be a different person to the one that he has been, and hopefully now can evolve from.
And this giant squid in particular is a really important animal to be able to use because it has the largest eye of any animal that we are aware of. So this squid, giant squid, was able to really see your character and actually again create this healing experience with them. And the idea of being seen is a really important aspect of healing from PTSD or any mental health concern. Really, is one would be in therapy and they feel like their therapist is finally able to see them accurately. and authentically. They are having an experience where they're with someone and they have the moment of being seen and how important that is for their healing. And it seems like this film did a beautiful job showing how being seen, whether it's by another individual human or by a creature that we have very little information about, and the power of healing it is to be seen by something.
Well, I'm glad you picked up on that, because if you see the movie, you'll see that, the eye, both of the man and the squid, we use the symbology of the eye, of looking at something that is alien. The man is as alien to the squid as the squid is to the man. They have no possible way of communicating anything. The man has no idea what the squid is processing in that moment, and the squid has no way of understanding what a ship or a human being is, probably. So there is a complete lack of understanding on one level, and yet they're both regarding each other. And we do a lot of things where we're with the man close to his eye looking at the squid, so that we can try and figure out what would he be thinking seeing this. And then conversely, we have a lot of things shot from around the eye of the squid to the man, asking the same question: what is the squid making of this experience? And we're leaving those questions to be answered, by the audience. But we very deliberately framed a lot of the shots to feature the idea of, as you said, seeing and trying to process, some visual information which falls for both the squid and the man. I don't know how many times the giant squid has risen to the surface and seen a warship and a person. Maybe the first time in the squid's experience it's ever done that. So what would that be like for the squid? Certainly the first time, our character has ever had this happen. And as far as we're aware, this event, if it happened at all, because, that's one of the things that I don't know from reading the letter, is like, is this purely in the imagination of the man who wrote the letter, or is this factual, or is this a mix of did he see a squid but he exaggerated the size of it? He actually saw a squid but he made it a 200-foot squid. I don't know the answer to any of these questions, and it didn't matter to us.
Well, I'm certain that people are enjoying watching this film. It is a wonderful film if you have an opportunity to see it. Even if you say, I'm not into animation, I'm certain that you will feel that this film will add hope and healing to one's life. Thank you so much for creating this film with your team. Thank you so much. And all the students. I always have to give a shout out to students who work really hard in crafting art. It's really important to have your minds and new ideas to be able to create good things in the world. Thank you.